My name is Renata. I was 36 years old when my husband of 9 years sat me down on our couch, dressed well, rehearsed, composed, and told me I had gotten ugly. He stopped himself one syllable in, swallowed the word back like that made it kinder. Then he finished the sentence. Unattractive. He said he deserved better. He said I'd let myself go. He looked at me like I was already erased. 2 years later, he was standing at an airport newsstand at 6:40 in the morning when he saw my face on the cover of Vogue. No heavy styling, no filters, just me, naturally glowing, unbothered and undeniable, staring back at him from every rack in that terminal. He thought he was leaving a woman too broken to fight back. Let me tell you how wrong he was. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe because tomorrow's story is even more intense. I made his coffee first. 9 years of marriage, and that habit never broke. His cup, then mine, in that order, without thinking. That morning I caught myself mid-pour and just stopped, held both mugs, set his on the counter by the window where the light hit it wrong, and watched the steam go flat. I didn't pour it out. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to watch something cool down that used to be warm. Maybe I just wasn't ready to throw anything away yet. That was the morning I filed. Let me back up. I'm Renata Okafor, 36 years old. I have a face that strangers call striking, and a voice I learned to keep low in rooms where Darius was performing. I worked, as a marketing coordinator for a regional healthcare company. Mid-level, steady, safe. I took that job because it didn't require travel, and Darius's role as regional sales director required plenty of it. Somebody had to be home. I volunteered, the way you do when you love someone and can't yet see the shape of what you're building around yourself. There's a hall closet in our house. My house, but I'll get to that. And on the top shelf sits a camera bag that hasn't been unzipped in 4 years. 2 lenses, a body I saved up for across 8 careful months, and a light meter my grandmother gave me when I was 25 and still certain about things. The bag has a thin layer of dust on the zipper pull. I noticed it every time I reached past it for a coat. I stopped noticing it eventually. That's the part that should have scared me. Darius was not a loud man. That's important to understand. He didn't throw things, didn't raise his voice. His cruelty was the quiet kind. The kind that makes you think you're being irrational for even calling it cruelty. It lived in size, in the particular way his eyes moved when I walked into a room dressed for something. A long, slow look that stopped just short of a comment. Sometimes the comment came anyway, delivered softly, with the patient tone of a man offering useful feedback to someone he'd given up on. "You might want to try that other dress," he said once. Just once. But once is enough when you already know the shape of what he means. Another time, getting ready for his company dinner, I asked if the earrings worked. He looked at me the way you look at a meal you've already decided you're not ordering and said, "You've just let yourself go a little, Ren. It's not about the earrings." My hands went still on the clasp. I wore the earrings. I smiled at every one of his colleagues. I laughed at the right moments. And on the drive home, I tried to remember the last time I had felt, in my own body, like something worth looking at. You know what's funny? I had an accounting minor, 4 years of coursework, a natural head for numbers, a professor who told me I had the kind of mind that found patterns other people missed. I filed that information away sometime around year 3 of the marriage, right around the time Darius suggested, gently, reasonably, in that voice he kept for ideas he needed you to believe were yours, that he handle the finances. "You're more of a creative, babe. Numbers stress you out." I let him have it. I let him have a lot of things I didn't realize I was handing over. That was the architecture of it. Small rooms, smaller windows, built slow enough that I never noticed the ceiling dropping. 3 nights before that quiet morning in the kitchen, I was washing the dinner dishes when his laptop pinged on the counter behind me. He was in the shower. The sound was nothing. Notifications pinged all the time. But something made me turn. The screen had lit up with a message preview, long enough to read from 3 feet away. "You were right. She's not even pretty. I don't know why you stayed so long. Come home." The name at the top was Jade. My hands went still in the dishwater. I didn't open the laptop. I didn't touch it. I dried my hands on the kitchen towel, the blue one with the frayed corner I kept meaning to replace, crossed to the counter and took a photograph of the screen with my phone. Clear. Time-stamped. Every word of it. Then I set his laptop back exactly as it was. I finished the dishes. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked down the hall and climbed into bed beside the man who had said those words to another woman about me, about my face, about my worth, about why he'd bothered to stay. And I lay there with my jaw locked and my eyes wide open, listening to him breathe like a man with nothing to hide. He slept fine. I counted the ceiling tiles until 4 a.m, and then I made a plan. I gave myself 1 minute. That was the deal I made somewhere around 3 a.m, lying there in the dark with my jaw locked and Darius breathing slow and even beside me. 1 minute to fall apart. That was it. After that, I had work to do. The minute came in the car the next morning. I made it to the end of our street before my chest cracked open and the tears hit hard and fast and ugly, the kind that don't care about your face. I gripped the wheel and let them come. 60 seconds, I counted. When the minute was up, I pulled into a gas station parking lot, wiped my face with the back of my hand, checked my eyes in the rearview mirror, and drove to the library. I used a public computer. I didn't want any of this on my phone, my laptop, any device that lived under the same roof as him. 3 hours. I read about marital asset division in our state, about what constituted financial misconduct, about the difference between legal separation and a formal filing. I took notes in a small spiral notebook I bought from the rack near the checkout desk. $3, cash. I still have it. The handwriting is neat. I was very calm by then. I did not confront Darius. Not that day, not the day after. You know what the worst part was? He didn't notice anything was different. He came home both evenings, poured himself a drink, asked how my day was, and sat in front of the television like a man without a single thing to answer for. I answered. I ate dinner across from him. I said goodnight. I was a ghost in my own kitchen, and he couldn't tell the difference. The third evening, I drove to see my oldest friend, Phyllis Monroe, a semi-retired paralegal who has known me since we were 19 years old and sharing bad dining hall coffee and worse opinions about our futures. Phyllis is not the kind of woman who asks how you're feeling before she asks what you need. I sat at her kitchen table, opened my phone to the photograph of the laptop screen, and set it in front of her without a word. She read it once. Her jaw tightened. That was all. One small shift in the muscle along her face. But I knew Phyllis, and I knew what that meant. "How long?" she said. "I don't know yet," I said. She nodded once, picked up her phone, and made 2 calls right there at the table while I drank the tea she'd poured before I arrived, because Phyllis always assumes you need something warm. The calls were short. She didn't explain much to either person, just names, dates, a firm request. When she put the phone down, she looked at me with the particular steadiness of a woman who has spent 30 years in rooms full of bad paperwork. "Give me 24 hours, she said. I gave her 24 hours. The following evening, she called me back. Jade wasn't new. That was the first thing. 2.5 years. That was what Phyllis's contact could confirm. 2.5 years of a second life running parallel to our first one, funded in part through a business account Darius had suggested we open jointly 3 years ago for household expense management. His idea. His framing. I'd agreed because he'd asked so reasonably, and because I'd already spent years believing that numbers weren't my thing. I sat with that for a moment. 2.5 years. I tried to place what I was doing 2.5 years ago. I remembered a conference he said he'd attended in Phoenix. A weekend in March, he said, was a client dinner situation that ran long. Small things. A sigh here, a late text there. I'd filed them where I filed everything, away, in a drawer I didn't open, because opening drawers meant asking questions, and asking questions meant not trusting him, and not trusting him felt like the problem was me. My hands went still on the phone. Then I pulled out the spiral notebook. 2 days after that, I went looking for the deed to the house. I'd always known, in a vague way, that my grandmother had left me the down payment. $38,000 that she'd saved over decades in a tin box under her bed and wired to my account 3 months before our closing. What I hadn't thought about, hadn't needed to think about because Darius managed the paperwork, was whose name was actually on the deed. It took me 20 minutes online and 1 call to the county recorder's office to confirm it. Mine. Only mine. Always mine. Darius had signed nothing. His name appeared nowhere on that document. Whether he'd assumed it would be handled eventually or simply never thought to check, I couldn't say. What I could say was that in 9 years, the man who managed our finances, who handled our paperwork, who suggested I was bad with numbers, had never once looked at the deed to the house he lived in. That evening, I booked a consultation with a divorce attorney. I pulled the financial records I could access, printed what I could print, and placed them in a manila folder alongside the photograph of the laptop screen and Phyllis's written summary of her findings. I labeled the folder with a single word. Then I slid it under the false bottom of my grandmother's old cedar chest, where Darius had never once thought to look. He came home at 6:15 on a Tuesday. That detail matters because Darius didn't come home at 6:15. Darius came home at 7:30, sometimes 8, occasionally with a reason and occasionally without one. 6:15 meant he'd planned this. 6:15 meant he'd left work early, gone somewhere else first, somewhere he could shower and change and collect himself, and then come home to me like a man arriving at a meeting he'd called. I heard the key in the lock. I was in the kitchen and I stayed there for a moment, just listening to the particular sound of him moving through the house. Jacket off, keys on the table, the soft, deliberate way he settled onto the living room couch. I came out because not coming out would have told him something. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he was wearing the charcoal shirt I'd given him for his birthday 2 years ago. He looked composed. He looked like a regional sales director about to explain a difficult quarter to a client he'd already decided to lose. "Sit down, Renata," he said. "I need to talk to you." I sat. He was unhappy. That was the opening. He'd been unhappy for a while, which was a phrase designed to sound honest without committing to a timeline. He said he felt like they'd grown apart. Another phrase, smooth and well-traveled, worn down to nothing by the number of men who'd used it before him. He said she had let everything slide. Not he, she. I watched him construct it in real time, the passive architecture of a man making someone else responsible for a conclusion he'd reached alone. Then he said he deserved to be attracted to his wife. My hands went still in my lap. "Is there someone else?" I asked. He pressed his lips together. "That's not the point." "It is, though." A pause. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. More like recalculation. Then he said it. "Renata, be honest with yourself. You've gotten ugly." He stopped. 1 syllable. He swallowed it back like he had some mercy left somewhere, and then he finished the sentence with the word he decided was safer. "Unattractive. You've gotten unattractive, and I deserve to be attracted to my wife." He said it with the measured tone of a man delivering feedback, like he was doing me a favor by being direct. I was wearing the navy wrap dress he'd told me twice that he liked. I had done my hair that morning, the way I used to before I'd started believing the things he'd said about how I looked. I was 36 years old, and I was, by any honest measure, in any room, by any pair of eyes that weren't his, a beautiful woman. I had known that once. He had worked on that knowledge for years, quietly and consistently, the way water works on stone. A comment, a sigh when I got dressed that I wasn't supposed to hear, a long, tired look that said, "Is that what you're wearing?" without ever opening his mouth. I had been living inside a slow erosion and calling it a marriage. You know what I felt, sitting there? Not shame, not the old familiar flinch. I felt, and I want to be careful with this word, clear. Like something that had been murky for a long time had finally settled, and I could see straight through to the bottom. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Okay, Darius," I said. 2 words, room temperature. He blinked, his mouth opened slightly like a man whose stage directions had just been removed. He'd expected something else. Tears, maybe, or the particular kind of begging that would have confirmed every story he planned to tell about me. He had not expected to be met with the silence of a woman who no longer had anything to prove to him. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. He sat alone in the living room with a script he didn't get to finish. I called Phyllis that night after he'd gone to bed. I told her what he said, word for word, including the syllable he tried to swallow. I heard her breath go short and sharp on the other end. Not surprise, something colder than surprise. "Good," she said. "Now we have everything we need." I opened my folder. I spread the documents across the kitchen table in the quiet of that house, and I started writing down numbers. Account totals, withdrawal dates, the mortgage payments, the household expenses, the amounts that moved through the business account at intervals too regular to be anything but deliberate. I wrote in the same neat handwriting from the library spiral notebook. I was very calm. I stayed at that table until 2 in the morning. 3 days later, Darius served me with divorce papers. He handed them to me himself, which told me he'd been advised against it by someone and done it anyway, because Darius always believed he was the most compelling person in any transaction. He stood in the doorway looking practiced and sorrowful, the performance of a man who'd tried everything. I accepted the envelope. I looked at it once. "Thank you," I said. I closed the door quietly. I had my attorney on the phone before his car cleared the end of our street. The knock came at 8:47 that evening. I knew it wasn't Darius. Darius didn't knock. Even now, even with papers served between us, he'd have used his key, because that was the kind of man he was, the kind who mistakes access for ownership, right up until the moment someone changes the locks. I opened the door and found Imani Okafor, my sister-in-law, standing on my porch in a coat she'd clearly grabbed without thinking, her eyes red and her hands twisting the strap of her bag like she was trying to wring something out of it. I stepped back. She came inside. We sat at the kitchen table. I put tea in front of her that she didn't touch. She looked at everything in the room except me for about 30 seconds, and then she looked at me, and she said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you a year ago." My jaw locked. She told me. Jade wasn't a late development. Jade wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness or any of the other soft words people use to make betrayal sound accidental. Jade was 7 months pregnant. 7 months, which meant the baby had been conceived 2 months before Darius ever sat me down on that couch in his charcoal birthday shirt and explained that I'd gotten unattractive. Which meant he'd already signed her apartment lease, which meant every carefully chosen word he'd said to me about letting myself go, about not making an effort, about what he deserved. He'd said all of it while already building a second life. He hadn't just been leaving. He'd been making sure I was too hollowed out to fight him when he did. Imani's voice cracked twice while she talked. I didn't say anything. I let her finish. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "I kept thinking. I kept telling myself there was a way to do it that wouldn't blow everything up. And then everything blew up anyway." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "I'm sorry, Renata. I'm so sorry." You know what it's like to hear information that doesn't surprise you but still manages to land like a fist? That's what that felt like. I wasn't shocked. Some part of me had already done the math, the timeline, the precision of his cruelty, the way it had been so consistent, so patient. You don't dismantle someone that carefully by accident. That takes a plan. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "You're here now," I said. She nodded. She finally drank some of the tea. I thought about my grandmother that night, after Amani left. I used to sit in her kitchen on Sunday mornings while she moved around the stove, and she'd hum something low and old, and the whole room smelled like butter and coffee, and I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She used to say that a woman who knows her own value doesn't need anyone to confirm it. I had forgotten that for a long time. I was starting to remember. Later that night, maybe 11, maybe closer to midnight, I was back at the kitchen table sorting through the latest batch of documents my attorney had asked me to pull. Financial records mostly, account histories, the kind of paperwork that tells the real story of a marriage if you know how to read it. I found it in a folder I almost skipped. It was an email chain from 4 years ago. The thread started with a name I recognized immediately. My old creative mentor, the photographer who'd taken me on as an assistant in my late 20s, and told me I had something rare. He'd tried to reach me once, I remembered, around that time. I thought I'd missed the email. I thought I'd been distracted. I had assumed, in the quiet way I'd assumed so many things, that the silence was my own fault. I read the chain. Darius had contacted him first. A short message, professional and warm, written the way Darius wrote everything. Reasonable sounding, with a kind of practiced regret built in. He told my mentor that I was taking a break indefinitely, that I was no longer interested in pursuing the work, that it was a personal decision and I'd asked him to pass it along. My mentor had written back once, a kind, brief reply, saying he understood and wished me well, and that the door was always open if I changed my mind. He never heard from me, because I never knew to write. My hands went still on the paper. I hadn't chosen to stop. I had grieved that choice for 4 years, privately, in the small hours, with the particular ache of someone who misses a version of herself she can't quite explain. I'd thought it was weakness. I'd thought I'd lost my nerve, let comfort win over ambition, traded something real for something easier. I had blamed myself for it so many times and in so many ways. It hadn't been my choice at all. I sat with that for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I put the email chain in my folder, picked up my phone, and called my attorney. "I need to move our meeting up," I said. "I have more than we thought." 3 days after I found the email chain, I sat across from my divorce attorney in her third-floor office and laid the folder on her desk. Not a partial folder, not a preliminary folder. The whole thing. The laptop photograph, the jade email chain, the business account records Phyllis had already started flagging. The thread between Darius and my old creative mentor, dated 4 years back, every page organized by date, every category tabbed and labeled. My attorney, a compact woman with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a way of going completely still when something interested her, opened it and didn't speak for several minutes. She looked up once. She said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" "Long enough," I said. She called Phyllis Monroe, my oldest friend and the semi-retired paralegal who'd already done more for me in 2 weeks than most people do in a crisis, before I even got back to my car. By the following afternoon, she'd referred me to a forensic accountant, a contact of Phyllis's, someone who specialized in exactly this kind of case, someone who had seen, as he put it in our first phone call, creative bookkeeping before. He called it creative. I had a different word for it. The following Tuesday, I sat in the forensic accountant's office, and he walked me through his findings line by line. He had a methodical way of presenting information, slow and precise, like he was waiting for me to flinch. I didn't flinch. 3 years, $42,611, redirected, steadily and quietly, from the household account Darius had convinced me to let him manage alone. The account he managed, he'd told me, because I was bad with numbers, because I'd get overwhelmed, because he was just trying to take one thing off my plate. I have an accounting minor. I forgot to mention that. I had let him talk me out of knowing that about myself. I had let him have that, too. Here's what the $42,000 looked like, on paper. 14 months of Jade's apartment rent, a lease on a car registered at her address, 6 weekend trips logged in the system as work travel, 3 of them to cities where his company had no regional office, a weekend in Charleston, 1 in New Orleans. You know what I kept thinking, sitting in that office, listening to those numbers? I kept thinking about the year he told me we needed to cut back on my photography supplies. I'd been saving up for a new lens. Nothing extravagant, just the next step. He'd said the budget was tight, that we needed to be careful, that I wasn't even using my equipment, so why spend more? I had nodded and let it go. That was the year he took Jade to New Orleans. My hands stayed flat on my knees through the whole meeting. My attorney filed the initial divorce claim that same week. She confirmed what I already knew. The house was mine, had always been mine. My grandmother's down payment, my name on the deed. 9 years of Darius never once asking to be added because he'd never thought to check. That house was the one thing he hadn't managed to reach. He called on a Thursday evening, 4 days after the filing. I almost didn't answer. Not because I was afraid of what he'd say. I was past that. I answered because I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear what version of himself he'd bring to the phone now that his attorney had seen our attorney's paperwork. He brought the original version, the charming one, the voice he used in sales meetings when he needed to walk something back. "Renata," he said, warm as a man who hadn't spent 3 years funding a second life on her dime. "I've been thinking. I've seen you. You look incredible. You really do. I don't think it has to be like this. I think we got into a place where we both made mistakes and it got away from us. I'm not trying to fight you. I never wanted to fight you. We were good together. We could talk about this like 2 adults and figure out something that works for both of—" I let him finish. I said, "You need to talk to my attorney." A beat. The salesman recalibrated. "It doesn't have to go through attorneys, Renata. We built something. We don't have to let lawyers—" "It already is," I said. I hung up. "Let me tell you something about a man who spent 3 years calling you bad with numbers. He only remembers your worth when someone else is counting it for him." That night I came home and stood in the front hallway for a moment. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet all week. Not empty exactly, just mine. Completely mine. I walked to the hall closet. I opened it. In the back, behind the coats I never wore anymore and a box of linens I'd forgotten I owned, sat my camera bag. Black nylon, a little dusty, the zipper pull worn soft from years of use. I took it out. I set it on the kitchen table and unzipped it slowly, and there was my camera, right where I'd left it, 4 years ago, when I told myself I just needed a break. I picked it up. The following Saturday, I drove downtown alone. I hadn't told anyone except Phyllis. She'd found the program online herself, actually. Sent me the link at 11 on a Tuesday night with a 3-word text. Go. Just go. I'd stared at it for 2 days before I registered. It was a church rec hall on a side street I'd never had a reason to use. Folding tables, high windows, the kind of ceiling that holds light differently than a house does. Flatter, wider, like the room itself isn't trying to be anything other than what it is. About 14 people were already there when I walked in. Mixed ages, mixed skill levels. A woman with a film camera she clearly hadn't loaded yet. A teenage boy with a phone and a quiet seriousness about him that I recognized immediately. I intended to observe. That was the whole plan. Watch, absorb, remember what it felt like to be around people who thought about images. I wasn't there to participate. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there the way you test water before you step in. Just a hand, just a toe, just checking. Damien Voss, the program's creative director, introduced himself in about 11 words and spent the rest of the session moving through the room, making precise, unsentimental observations about people's work. Not harsh, just exact. He had the kind of eye that didn't flatter and didn't soften. He said what he saw. He ran the program pro bono. I learned that later. He didn't mention it. I stood near the back mostly. I shot 3 frames on my phone, just the light coming through one of the high windows, the way it cut across the folding tables at an angle and made everything it touched look like it mattered. Just instinct. Just my hands remembering something my brain had been pretending to forget. At the end of the session, Damien came over and looked at my phone screen without asking. The 3 frames I'd taken of the window light. He looked for a moment, then, "You've been doing this a long time." I said, "I used to." He nodded once, said nothing else, and walked away. I went back the next Saturday, and the one after that. The 3rd Saturday, he asked me about the editorial series. He was putting together a project. Working women over 35, reclaiming identity after loss, natural light, real faces. He said he had 6 participants already, and he needed 1 more. He asked if I'd consider modeling. I said no. The following Saturday, he asked again. He'd pulled up reference images on his laptop, the kind of photographs where the subject isn't performing anything. He walked me through the concept calmly. I listened. I said I appreciated it. I said no. 2 weeks after that, he left a printed brief on the table in front of me without making a production of it. The project details, the timeline, the intended placement. I read it on the drive home. I left it on my kitchen counter. I thought about it more than I wanted to admit. The 4th time, he didn't show me anything. He just looked at me directly and said, "I'm not asking because you're pretty. I'm asking because you have something in your face that most people spend their whole careers trying to learn how to fake. It's not a compliment, Renata. It's a technical observation. And I don't beg, so this is the last time I'll ask." My jaw didn't lock. My hands didn't go still. Something else happened. Something quieter. I said, "Okay." The shoot was a single afternoon 3 weeks later. Natural light from a south-facing window, 1 reflector, a stool, no set dressing. Damien gave almost no direction. He shot for a while, adjusted the reflector, shot some more. He didn't say gorgeous or beautiful or any of the things photographers say to manage their subjects. He said things like, "Chin just slightly left," and "Stay with that, don't move from that." About 40 minutes in, I stopped thinking about the divorce. That was it. That was the whole thing. I wasn't performing. I wasn't holding my face the way a woman holds her face when she's been told she's gotten unattractive. I was just there, present in my own skin for the first time in longer than I could honestly account for. My grandmother used to make me stand in her kitchen window light when I was small, because she said I had the kind of face that needed real sun, not overhead bulbs. I could almost smell her kitchen. Cloves and brown sugar, the sweet potato pie she made every November without measuring a thing. Damien called it a wrap at just under 2 hours. I thanked him. I drove home. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my attorney's most recent email. The forensic accountant had submitted his formal report. There were 3 documents to review and a follow-up call to schedule before the end of the week. The shoot was one afternoon. The divorce was still the work. I uncapped my pen and started reading. 2 months before Thanksgiving, I heard his car before I saw it. I was at the kitchen table with the forensic report and a highlighter when the headlights swept across the window. 7:14 in the evening, a Tuesday. I knew the sound of that engine the way you know a sound you've been unconsciously bracing against for months. I didn't move. He knocked. Then he rang the bell. Then he knocked again, the way a man knocks when he's decided the door will open, because doors have always opened for him. I went to the door. He was standing in the driveway, cold in a good coat, his breath visible in the November air. He looked composed, practiced. He had that face on, the sales meeting face, the everything is reasonable face. But his jaw was doing something tight underneath it, and I could see he'd driven straight here without fully thinking through what he was going to say. "Renata." He said my name like a bid for reasonableness. "We need to talk." I stood in the doorway. I didn't invite him in. "My attorney filed what she filed," I said. "That's what there is to talk about. You're making a mistake." He said it with a kind of careful patience, like I was a new hire who hadn't understood the memo. "I know you're angry, and I get that, I do. But what you're doing right now, this level of aggression, this is vindictive. That's not strategy, that's emotion, and that's going to cost you." My hands were loose at my sides. "You pulled $40,000 out of our joint account over 3 years," I said. "I'm not being vindictive, I'm being accurate." He shifted his weight. "That money was documented." He stopped. You know what I noticed? He hadn't asked me how I was. Hadn't once. In every call, every message, every version of this conversation, he had never once asked how I was doing. He only reached for me when he needed something managed. That's not grief. That's logistics. "Renata." His voice dropped, gentled. "Version 3.0 now. The concerned version. The one that used to work. This isn't who you are. You don't do things like this. You're not this person. I know you. You're letting Phyllis and whoever else put things in your head, and you're going to blow up both our lives because you're hurt. I understand you're hurt. But this..." I let him get all the way to the end of it. Then I said, "You don't know who I am." He went still. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. I stood in my hallway for one breath, listening to the silence on the other side of the door, and then I walked to the kitchen. I made the sweet potato pie that night. I hadn't made it in years. It was my grandmother's recipe. No measurements written anywhere, just what her hands remembered and what mine had learned by standing beside her. Brown sugar, cloves, a little more vanilla than you think it needs. She used to say the secret was patience with the oven and not making it while you were unhappy. I'd always thought that was just something people say. I made it anyway. I needed my hands to do something true. The smell filled the whole house by 9 o'clock. I stood at the counter and let it. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, the asset claim was finalized. My attorney submitted the full forensic package, the account records, the redirected funds, the mentor emails, the documented timeline of Jade's lease. I reviewed every page. I signed where I was told to sign. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt like a woman who had done the necessary work. I called Darius's mother myself, warm and easy. She sounded relieved to hear my voice. I told her I was planning to come if the invitation still stood. She said, "Baby, it always stood." We talked for 12 minutes about nothing important and everything that mattered. Her garden, the new grandniece, the sweet potato pie she always loved that I always brought. I told her I'd made it fresh. She said she'd save me a seat herself. The night before Thanksgiving, Imani, Darius's younger sister, who had loved me longer and more honestly than most people in that family, sent a text at 10:47. "He's bringing Jade." I read it twice. I set my phone on the counter. I thought about what that meant. The statement he was trying to make, the control he still believed he had over the room. I picked the phone back up and typed, "Good." I meant it. 8 months after the shoot, Damien called on a Wednesday morning. The editorial campaign had been acquired, expanded. A full feature in Vogue, not a mention, not a sidebar, the cover. He said it plainly, the way he said everything. "It's you, your face, your story in the feature copy. No heavy styling. They wanted it as shot." He told me the issue date. He told me the newsstands. I thanked him. We hung up. I sat down on my kitchen floor, not because I was breaking, because something was coming back, something I had buried so slowly and so carefully that I hadn't fully understood it was gone until it started returning. The weight of it was enormous. Recognition feels like that sometimes, not like joy, not at first, like a door you've been leaning against for years suddenly swinging open, and you have to catch yourself, and you have to let your legs remember how to stand. I sat with it, all of it, every Saturday morning, every no that became yes, the closet I'd walked past for 4 years, the camera I'd finally taken back out, my grandmother's kitchen window light, and the way Damien had said technical observation like that was the highest thing he could offer. The woman on that cover didn't happen to me. I built her. I let myself feel the full size of that. Then I stood up. Imani called on a Friday morning, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. She said he'd been at the airport. 6:40 in the morning, early flight. reaching for a bottle of water at the newsstand. And there it was, right there on the rack, between the crosswords and the travel candy, his almost ex-wife. On the cover of Vogue, in natural light, with her real face and her real eyes, and an expression that, Imani's exact words, looked like a woman who had already won something he didn't even know was a competition. She said he stood there for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, at an airport newsstand, with his water in his hand. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. Then I said, "Did he make his flight?" Imani laughed so hard she had to put me on hold. He called that same afternoon. I watched his name on the screen until it stopped. He called again that evening, again the next morning. On the third day, he sent a text. "We need to talk." I read it. I set the phone face down. I went back to the settlement terms my attorney had sent over and spent 40 minutes annotating the language on the asset disbursement clause. That was all he got from me. Let me tell you something about what that Vogue feature actually said, because it wasn't just my face. It was the full story. The community arts program, the reclaimed career, the creative director consultancy I was now building from the ground up. 2 editorial houses had reached out since the campaign expanded. A New York agency wanted a conversation about taking the whole concept national. The feature called my eye for composition instinctive and unerring. It used the word visionary in a sentence that contained my name. Visionary. The same woman he'd called unattractive, catching himself 1 syllable short like that made it merciful, was being described in a national magazine as visionary. I didn't frame the article. I didn't need to. It was just true now, sitting in print, and there was nothing he could do to make it smaller. The unknown number called on the Thursday. I almost didn't pick up, but something, instinct maybe, or just the particular stillness of that afternoon, made me answer. It was Jade. Her voice was younger than I expected, careful. She said she didn't know about me for the first 6 months, that Darius had told her he was separated, that the paperwork was just slow, that his wife had already moved on. She said by the time she understood the real picture, she was already in it. She said she was sorry. She kept saying it. She built a whole careful structure out of that word. I listened without interrupting, all the way to the end. Then I said, "I don't need your confession, and I don't need your apology. What I need from you is exactly what I've been getting. Nothing." She went quiet. "He turns women into mirrors," I said. "Be careful what you reflect." I hung up. She wasn't my enemy. She was the next chapter of a story I had already closed. Whatever she was carrying, and she was carrying more than she'd said on that call, I knew that much, was hers to reckon with now. I wished her clarity. I moved on. 4 days later, Darius's mother called. She was crying before I said hello. Not dramatic crying, not performance. The kind that sounds like it's been building for days and finally found a crack to come through. She told me what he'd said to the family, that I'd left him, that the divorce was my idea, my failure, my inability to hold a marriage together, that he'd done everything right and I'd walked away, that he was the one who'd been left. My throat tightened once, just once. Every person who loved him had believed it. His aunts, his cousins, the family friends who'd danced at our wedding, they'd all been given the same version, delivered by a man who had spent 9 years perfecting the performance of the reasonable one in the room. "I believed him, baby," she said. "I'm so sorry." I stood at my kitchen window for a moment. The light was doing something soft and gray through the glass. November light, late afternoon. I thought of my grandmother's kitchen window, the way the morning came through it sideways and warm, the way she'd always said, "Come stand here, let me see your face in the good light." She had always known how to find me in it. "Can I come to Thanksgiving?" I asked. A pause, long enough that I heard her breathe. "I'll set your place at the table myself," she said. The night before Thanksgiving, I made the pie. Brown sugar, cloves, more vanilla than seemed right. My hands remembered what my grandmother's hands had taught them, and I didn't rush a single step. I poured the filling into her dish, the heavy ceramic one with the small chip on the rim that I had carried out of that house and into every kitchen I'd ever lived in. I slid it into the oven. I cleaned the counter. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. I slept clean through till morning. I got there at 10:15. The family wasn't due until noon. Darius closer to 1. I'd planned it that way. Enough time to sit with his mother in the quiet before the house filled up, before the noise of all those people made it easier to hide from what was true. She met me at the door in her house slippers, apron already on, and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than a hello hug should. I let her hold it. She smelled like nutmeg and fabric softener and something I couldn't name, something that had always felt like home in a way my own marriage somehow never quite did. We sat at her kitchen table with coffee, and she didn't ask me anything right away. She just let us be there together for a minute, and I was grateful for that. Then I put the folder on the table. I didn't make a speech about it. I just walked her through it the same way I'd walked my attorney through it, methodically, evenly, page by page. The financial summary first, the dates, the account withdrawals mapped against Jade's lease payments, the car, the 4 weekends logged as work travel that weren't. Then the mentor emails. I showed her the chain, Darius's note, his tone, the careful language of a man making a decision that wasn't his to make. I told her what I'd given up without knowing I'd given it up. I told her how long it had been running. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make sounds of disbelief or try to fill the silence with her own reaction. She just read, and listened, and read some more. When I was done, she sat back in her chair and looked at her kitchen window for a long moment. 9 years, she said, not a question. Yes, ma'am. She was quiet for another beat. Then, I want the whole family to hear this. By 12:30, the living room was full. His aunts, 2 cousins, the family friends who'd known Darius since childhood. Imani was already there. She'd squeezed my hand twice and hadn't let go of it long enough for it to mean anything less than everything. I was at the head of the table when Darius walked in. He came through the front door with Jade at his side, her coat open, her stomach visible, the whole arrival staged to land a certain way. He had that look on his face, the one I'd spent 9 years learning. Chin up, expression settled, the practiced ease of a man who believed he had already controlled the room before he entered it. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes moved across the table. Seated family. His mother standing at the kitchen doorway with her hands folded. And me, at the head of the table, with the folder closed in front of me and nothing on my face that gave him anything to work with. His mother said, "Your wife has something to say." Darius said, "She's not my wife anymore." I said, "Sit down, Darius." He sat. You know what I noticed? He didn't look at Jade. Not once. He looked at me, then at the folder, then at his mother. Jade was still standing near the door, coat half on, reading the room in the way someone does when they're calculating the distance back to the exit. I spoke for 7 minutes. I know that because I had practiced it at home, and it had taken 7 minutes every single time. I covered the account, I covered the dates, I covered the mentor emails and what they cost me, not in dollars but in years. I covered the pregnancy timeline, which placed the beginning of his new life well before the first time he ever told me the marriage was unhappy. I did not raise my voice. I did not look for reactions. I put each fact in the room and let it stand. He tried to interrupt twice. The first time he said, "You don't have to do this." His mother said, "Let her finish." The second time he started with, "You're not being fair." His mother said, "Darius, 1 word." He stopped. Jade left somewhere around minute 5. I heard the front door close, quiet and careful, like she was trying not to disturb the room she was abandoning. I didn't pause. I didn't watch her go. I finished what I'd come to say. When I was done, Darius looked at the table. Then he looked at me. "You're humiliating me," he said, low, tight. "This is revenge." I looked at him, just looked, no heat in it, and said, "No, this is just what happened." I left the folder on the table. I picked up my grandmother's pie dish. Then I went around the room. I said goodbye to each person by name. His Aunt Clara, his cousin Jerome, the family friends who danced at our wedding. I thanked them for having me. I meant it. I hugged Imani last. She held on. So did I. Then I walked out the front door. I sat in my car for 60 seconds. My hands rested in my lap, loose, still, not shaking. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything I needed to recover from. I was just done. I pulled out of the driveway and I did not look in the rearview mirror. 2 years is a long time. It's also nothing at all. That's the thing nobody tells you about rebuilding. It doesn't feel like construction while it's happening. It just feels like Tuesday. And then one morning you sit down at your desk, coffee in hand, light coming through the east window at exactly the right angle, and you realize the life around you is one you actually chose. That's where I was. My desk took up the whole corner of the room that used to be Darius's home office. Solid oak. I bought it myself, carried the receipt home like a small flag. Behind me, framed and lit, was a wall of my own photographs. 21 of them, different sizes, no particular theme except that I loved every single one. In front of me, a schedule that belonged entirely to me. 3 editorial consultations that week, a campaign review on Thursday, Saturday workshop at the rec hall, 9 to noon. Nobody had arranged that schedule around someone else's travel. Nobody had quietly suggested I scale it back. Let me tell you something about a woman who's been quiet too long. When she finally starts talking, she doesn't stop. Not out of anger, just because she remembers, finally, that she has things worth saying. The consequences had landed the way consequences do when you've documented everything, completely and without drama. Darius's company had a morality clause in his contract, the kind that gets invoked when financial misconduct is no longer theoretical. Once my attorney filed the civil claim for fraudulent misappropriation, $40,000 itemized and sourced and mapped against every log entry he'd ever filed as a business expense. They placed him on administrative leave within 2 weeks. The sales directorship was gone by the end of the month. No severance package survives a forensic accounting report. His mother hadn't spoken to him for 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. When she finally did, Imani told me what she said. I've turned it over in my mind more than once. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with something quieter than that. Recognition, maybe. You didn't just cheat on her. You tried to erase her. There's a difference. Yes, ma'am, there is. With his income gutted and his assets frozen by the civil claim, the rent on Jade's apartment went unpaid. She was 8 months pregnant in a city she'd built her life around a man who had now lost the second life he'd been maintaining alongside the first. I don't know what came after that for her. I made a choice not to follow it. She had gotten the same promises I got, delivered by the same man using the same practiced warmth, and whatever wreckage she was standing in, I hadn't put her there. He had. That story finished itself without me. Darius called once more, maybe 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. He didn't beg. He didn't try the warm voice again. He just said, quietly, honestly, for maybe the first time, I underestimated you. My jaw didn't even lock. I said, I know. I hung up. That was the only honest thing he ever said to me. I held it for exactly as long as it took to set the phone down. Then I went back to work. Phyllis Monroe, my oldest friend and the woman who built half my legal case out of sheer righteous fury, sent me a link one quiet afternoon. A small item in a regional business publication. Darius Okafor, formerly of regional sales leadership, now listed as a sales consultant at a mid-level firm. No photo, no quote, just a name and a title, sitting there in plain text like an ordinary life. I read it once. I closed the tab. Imani and I had lunch on the 3rd Thursday of every month now, not because we scheduled it that formally, it just fell that way. Easy and regular, the way good things do when they don't have to work against anything anymore. She laughed differently these days. Easier, lighter. like a woman who had set down something heavy and almost forgotten she'd been carrying it. We didn't talk about Darius. We talked about her new apartment, about the campaign I was launching in New York, about the bread basket at our usual place that we never managed to finish before the food came. That's what love looks like when it survives the person it was organized around. It just keeps going. It finds its own shape. On Saturdays, I taught at the same church rec hall where I'd walked in 2 years ago, intending only to observe. Same high windows, same particular quality of light in the morning. I brought my own camera now, the good one, the one that had spent 4 years in a hall closet. That morning, the morning I'm telling you about, I made 1 cup of coffee, exactly the way I liked it, the right amount of everything, no adjustments for anyone else's preference, no muscle memory pulling my hand toward a second mug. I carried it to my desk and sat in the light coming through the east window, warm and full, landing across the photographs on the wall and the schedule in front of me, and the solid oak surface of a desk I had chosen for myself. I didn't pour anything out. I just let it be good. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!